I struggle, and I'm still struggling. Since the news broke yesterday in the middle of a prayer meeting, this little beautiful and peaceful baby Agatha, and known to most of us as Aggie, who we saw first and foremost in her mother's arm, as a father's arms, and whom many of us had to cuddle. I struggle, and I'm still struggling. And of course, you understand that everything has to be changed. Even the sermon that was prepared for today has to change. To ask the Lord, what do you want us to hear? And so I want us to look briefly at the topic that comes on screen. The lament of Christ in his suffering. And kindly invite us this morning and perhaps this week to meet Christ afresh at the cross, so that we may have some comfort, some hope, some peace, some strength, and maybe, just maybe, to find a way to come out of this thick darkness. That we are now experiencing, and perhaps as you are new here in your own life. So just one verse, which I will unpack a little bit by God's grace. And that's Matthew 27, verse 46. About 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Lord, continue to speak to us and minister to us by the power of your Spirit. And wipe our tears as we listen to your voice and as we lament, and lament with Jesus. Amen. Have you ever felt forsaken? And I'm sure with a news like this, there are so many why questions that remain unanswered. Why did God let this to happen? James and Belinda might be asking, why? Where is God in all this? We as a church have prayed for this little one. I remember I was in Switzerland that day. The message came during the night, pray for James and Belinda. And we have prayed as a church faithfully, Saturday after Saturday, day after day. And perhaps too you have prayed and prayed, but just maybe the only answers you get are silence and darkness. So you begin to ask also, like the psalmist, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thought and every day have sorrow in my heart? Now, for God to forget means that he doesn't come to rescue. And for him to hide his face is contrasted to what we hear in the blessing that we find in the Old Testament. May his face turn towards you. May his face shine upon you. And here, he hides his face. For God to hide his face is the ultimate terror, the most suffering of all. For think about at the moment, for when the source of all good turns his face away, you ask yourself, what hope can we have? What one can do in those times? Jesus Christ felt that his Father has turned his face away from him. And so he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? That was the only time Jesus spoke to his Father as God rather than Father. And yet, even in his agony, remarkable, Jesus was still praying. He was still speaking to his Father in a personal term, my God, my God. That is a cry of a man or a woman who has felt forsaken by God. And for Jesus, it was a cry of him who was entering the abyss of death and was about to be swallowed up by the darkness. But he's not the first one who asked such a question. For King David, millennium before Jesus lived, as we read in Psalm 22, King David too asked the same question. My God, why have you forsaken me? And he went to say, why are you so far from saving me? So far from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry out day by day, but you do not answer, by night, and I'm not silent. As I was pondering on these words yesterday and reading some of those Psalms and reflecting on the whole things that is happening, and I was struck by, all of a sudden we see David plunging into such a depth of suffering. After these first few Psalms that comes before, David has seen God's rescue, has seen God answered prayer. And all of a sudden, the one who has seen God miraculous as a miracle worker plunge himself down. And those are terrible words. Think about it. My God, why you forsaken me? Why are you so far from me? But again, like Jesus, notice he's still saying, my God. A deep feeling and a great faith expressed there. But what is so disturbing also for David is that the felt distance of God. Back again to those, Clayton. Notice it's so far. He's feeling God is so distant. And when you think about that, basically that's leading him to groaning. And the word there is saying, I'm screaming. And it's okay to scream. And yesterday we had a few of those. And screaming even in anger, just David, I've said there, Jesus. David is screaming in agony. He is the king to whom prayers have been promised that, if you pray, God will answer. And he has seen some of those answers. But notice now, he's constant by day and by night, prayers not answered. All he's left with is a turmoil in his soul. Oh, the unbearable pain and the distress we experience by the felt distance of God. My God, why have you forsaken me? Cried out David, and Jesus reiterated the same word, same question. Like David, there was no answer for Jesus. The context tells us that neither Elijah, who sometime appeared to him, nor God himself came to deliver Jesus from the cross. The only answer Jesus gave were silence and darkness. Now, nothing panics us more like the silence of God. When we know, or when we hear, or when we've been told that when we pray, God hears, God answers. But why is silence? It was agony for Jesus. In fact, his friends, whom we call the disciples, testified that Jesus, that night before even he was crucified there, that night, he was in such anguish that he prayed with such intensity to the point that great bloody drop of sweat fell from his brow. Suffered. We hear these days politicians, when they want our vote, they come and say to us, we feel your pain. When in reality, many of them have no idea. I wish they could just hear or learn the lesson which comes from this great quote from Martin Luther. No one understands who has not tested it. I sat down yesterday looking at Belinda and James, at time giving hugs and holding, with no words. And even when they had the courage to say, Abby, would you pray? I could not pray. I don't understand. I haven't yet lost a child. I have not that experience. But I get great comfort and consolation that Jesus understands. For he has felt our pain and your pain, and even worse. Friends, we may still wrestle to understand why God allows things like this, why God allows evil. We may still wrestle to understand why God will allow the little Aggie to bring joy to us and then to leave us so premature, leaving a heartbroken, grieving mother and father, family, community. While you may continue to still wrestle to try to understand things like that, or even for those who are footballers, and even if you are not a footballer, you sympathize, why the rising star, Liverpool forward, Diego Jota, and his brother had to die in a car crash, just 11 days after his wedding, leaving a grieving wife and 3 children who will grow up without a father. Why would God allow, as we still wrestle to understand the most recent tragedy as well, since at least last night, 32 people killed in Texas, including 14 children after this flash flooding? While we may still wrestle to understand why God would allow or would permit such tragedies, which perhaps have occurred in your own life, in your own family. Why? When we may still wrestle, one thing is sure of. Let's not doubt. Let's not doubt God's capacity to feel compassion for our pain. Feels our pains, and have that compassion, because when Jesus Christ was nailed to a cross, he experienced the extreme physical pain, the pain of dying, a death of slow torture. And as he hung on that cross, he also experienced absolute spiritual pain, the pain of being abandoned by God to the cruelty of the world. So as I said earlier, friends, I invite us to look to the cross and meet Jesus afresh there. For when we meet him there, we are meeting someone who can feel our pain. He has experienced our pain, your pain, and something worse, as he felt forsaken. And as we meet him there, his compassionate look into our eyes, his compassionate touch, his words filled with compassion are just all we need. Now, he did not only feel forsaken, he was forsaken. In those words which himself said, my God, why you forsaken?" You can just feel he could not fully understand why God forsake him. And him being forsaken on the cross was a fearful thing. And terrible, it's painful. But for us, it is good news, because it means that we can meet, or we meet him, when we meet him at the cross. Not only we meet someone who can feel our pain, but we meet someone who has experienced the full measure of tragedy of human existence. Out of his experience of physical suffering and spiritual rejection, Jesus not only sympathized with our pain, he empathized with it. And without going into detail, he was God forsaken so that we might not be forsaken. And not only we meet him there and we get comfort and some strength, but when we meet him there is a strong hope. A strong hope comes in the fact that he was not completely abandoned by his Father. For when he spoke one more time from the cross, he prayed, I quote, "Father." And this time he's not saying, "God, my God." He's saying, "Father, into your hand I commit my spirit." Do you feel the bond of a fellowship between Father and the Son again in those words? And of course, the Father answered his prayer, because he did not let his Son rot in the grave, but he raised him back to life on the third day. And with the resurrection, just the first step, because after the resurrection, Jesus ascended, and he is sitting right now at the right hand of his Father. The thick darkness that was in those times when he cried, my God," did not and will not overcome the light. For the light rose from the darkness and spelled out all the darkness. And as David said in his prayer, or in the words, that right now this is Jesus who cried, my God, died and rose, ascended. He is now praying and interceding. And as David said, I bet you, when he sees death and all this, he is angry. And one day, he will put all things to right. Light will always shine in the darkness. And the psalmist, the same David, who went also down plunged in the depth of suffering, say also this: weeping may remain for a night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. So at the cross we meet Jesus. He ministered to us. As we pass through the cross, we see him rising from the dead. And we see him ascending. And his promise, one of them is that one day we will be with him where he is and where Aggie is. And we will see Aggie and meet her again. So friends, as we find ourselves walking in the thick darkness and heavy trouble of life, and as a Christian, yet still clinging to the God who we feel sometime who doesn't seem to be there, the pastor to a church, the Hebrews, encourage us to consider him, that is Christ, who endured such opposition from sinful men, who suffered a lot. And the reason we need to consider him, so that we may not grow weary and lose heart. So this week, in our brokenness, why don't we perhaps take times to meditate on these psalms that I've been referring to in the sermon as they come? I start with the latest one, Psalm 30. For when you read, when you meditate, that psalm contains the assurance that the thick darkness of our night will end with a morning joy. Psalm 22 will stir up us to that thoughtful consideration of Jesus. And when we meditate on it, we will notice that in his period of divine forsakenness, the psalmist still remembers that he belongs to a people who have celebrated a history of divine faithfulness as well. He belongs to a people who not only see terror, but to a people who have also known and seen God's smile. And you will notice that when God hides his face, the only thing to do is to go back to him and seek his face. And the last psalm there, with only 6 short verses, you will notice that with no change in outward circumstances, David both cries in agony, in agonizing perplexity, but also at the end, sing with joyful trust. And when we meditate on these, I hope they will allow us to keep on going to the cross and meet Jesus, who prayed these psalms in his lament during his most intense and agonizing sufferings. They will allow us to keep going to Jesus, who, when he was right here, down here on earth, in the darkness, in the days of his flesh, cries out with loud cries of tears and prayers, but also rejoicing in the confident trust that the Lord, his Father, will not leave him in the grave. For all the more, when we go to Jesus, we meet him in his death. We meet him in his resurrection. We meet him in his ascension. And as he is praying, and that's where our hope rests. As I close, I've particularly seen some of this hope in James and Belinda. Not only sitting down with them, but also with the way they wanted to announce this news to us as a church. So let's hear and get some of the glimpse of hope as we hear their words, Tamara. And then after that, we'll sing a song. And then we'll continue.
Dear Church, our beautiful daughter, Agatha Shona Hawes, went home to be with the Lord on Saturday morning. She passed peacefully in Belinda's arms, full of milk and love. Our hearts are completely broken, but through the pain, we are so full of joy and love. A love far greater than any sorrow we are feeling. Every time we think of her, we can't help but smile and be thankful for our time with her. She taught us so much. God's Spirit is working through her, making us more loving and kind each day, and displaying God's love to those who don't know him yet. We'd read John 1 with her, and she helped us see that the light truly shines so bright in the darkness, and the darkness will never overcome it. Aggie's light shines so brightly even now. In her short life, all Aggie knew was love, and she was loved so well by so many of you. We will forever be grateful for how you have held our family through Agatha's life, and how we know you will hold us in our grief. Agatha knew only love, and so we would like you to make sure to show your love today. Go and hold your children close. Hug your parents and sisters and brothers and tell them you love them.